Welcome to Inspired Change, a new inspirational and motivational broadcast that strives to empower men in a positive way, designed to educate, empower, and inspire even the busiest individual on the go over that first cup of coffee. Please join me in welcoming Gunter, international psychologist, author, speaker, and producer.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspired Change. What a difference a week makes. So, in this last week, we've encountered in Australia more COVID cases, and so subsequently we find ourselves in another lockdown. Really great timing. It's school holidays and it's winter, and so it's going to prove to be quite challenging for some people, especially those with children. So my head and heart goes out to you. I hope you can make the most of this period of time and the home doesn't turn into either a battlefield or a zone of boredom. In addition to that particular issue of being locked down again, which in my book is a reasonable response, in fact, to trying to manage this pandemic. In fact, my view was that we were a little bit late out of the blocks with it, and we could have probably done it a week earlier and controlled this more, but then I'm not a decision maker in this game, nor am I an epidemiologist. But just saying. So the other thing that's happened in this week is that I had my first AstraZeneca COVID injection, and for the first 24 hours everything was going swimmingly, and then on day 2, as my business manager pointed out, I got some slight reaction to the whole thing, which was feeling fatigued, headache, and aches in my joints and my muscles. Nothing really serious. And in fact, the best way that I found to treat it was on advice of my wife, who said take 2 Panadol and 2 Nurofen, a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. And it certainly did the job. So aside from some very minor reactions to the vaccine, I'm all good. And in fact, I'm anticipating getting the second shot and certainly feeling like I'm doing my bit, not just for myself, but for the community as a whole. So in this lockdown, I thought it was quite ironic that I'm getting this vaccination. And I'd like to encourage people to seriously think about doing the same. And I said, it's not just for you, it's for the community as a whole. And no, I don't think Bill Gates is putting any metallic objects into the vaccine or anything like that to turn us into walking magnets. So listen to the scientists, not the conspiracy people. Just saying. So in this period, I've spent a lot of time on my computer and my iPad, because most of my work at the moment is going through a telehealth process. So stay tuned, because I've written an article in tune with the whole notion about benefits and concerns about telehealth, the telehealth process, and that should be coming out relatively soon, and I'll keep you posted when it's actually available. So, what do I want to talk about today? It's a little bit informal. I've been having some technical challenges, i.e. neighbours are renovating and the noise has been quite intrusive. So I've had to wait, and I apologise that this podcast is going to be a wee bit late and not necessarily on its due date. But one of the things I want to do today is actually a little bit of a segue, and I want to talk about a book that I'm currently reading and reviewing, which I'm actually really, really excited about, because it's probably in my evaluation, one of the best books on parenting I've read probably in the last 15 years. It certainly resonates deeply with a lot of my views and how I work, and what I think we need to focus on in the current sort of social climate, especially about raising children and how we raise them. And so what is this book that I'm talking about? Well, you probably, if you've been following my podcast, have heard me talk about a gentleman called Gabor Mate, who is an MD and who has been working, for many years in the field of addictions and family medicine, and speaks very eloquently about attachment and looking at what is actually necessary in terms of healing from trauma and addictions. And so when I saw this book advertised, my immediate reaction was intense interest. Now, the guy who co-authored this book with him is a guy called Gordon Neufeld. He's a psychologist. Both of them are Canadian. And I don't know how I missed this man. I had not heard of him, but subsequently in looking him up, I have found numerous YouTube videos, and he has a website. So again, the name is Gordon Neufeld. And Gordon Neufeld and Gabor Mate collaborated on this book called Hold On to Your Kids: Why Parents Need to Matter More Than Peers. Now, my wife and I, we're both in the mental health field and also in, social commentary and philosophy, have had this view that we in our society have drifted away from the primacy of the family and have allowed, peer groups to take undue influence. And so, here I was holding a book, that basically spells this out. And not only that, but Gabor and Gordon have put this together in a way which is a fantastic framework. And so not only do I highly recommend this for parents, but I think most clinicians, psychiatrists, psychologists, and doctors should really read this, because it really gets to the crux of the matter, which is what's happened in this process wherein we're seeing so many mental health issues arise, like anxiety, like depression, like suicidality. And again, let me correct myself in that they're not mental health issues, they're actually psychological signs of distress and disorder. Why are they there? Now, as I said, Gabor Mate has been a promoter of understanding attachment for a long time. And he has obviously found sort of like a soulmate in Gordon Neufeld. And, the book follows a very, very neat structure. So, essentially in part one, the first chapter really says why parents matter more than ever. And he then begins to talk about attachment, subverted instincts, and so on. So for all of those of you who are listening, this is certainly where I go. If you don't read anything else this year in regard to raising children, then you need to get this particular book, Hold On to Your Kids: Why Parents Matter More Than Peers. And it's not a difficult read. It's actually very, very nicely narrated, and there is also an audio version of this. So let me just come at it from my angle, and this is where I think it's really important that we again consider the notion of turning points. We've reached a point in time wherein we have the technology to be connected, but are probably socially more disconnected than ever. Okay, so one of the things that I've been looking at working with men is to help men understand that in fact patriarchal ideology has alienated men from meaningful relationships, and this extension of patriarchy, which is called neoliberalism, has made us fall into a socially engineered environment where work is more important than the human being and the human being's relationship with one another. Okay, so in hold on to your kids very early on, they talk about this issue of the attachment village or the lack of it, and again I'll come back to it when I look at most of the issues that we encounter. At some point or another, there is an attachment issue and there is a lack of intimate contact at a human level. And we really need to address this very, very immediately. We need to get on top of this really, really quickly. Patriarchy and neoliberalism tends to, break us up from one another, either through, becoming workaholics or becoming overly concerned about status, and we're missing out on the core function of what it is to be human, which is to be connected. Martin Buber, a Hasidic philosopher, talked eloquently about the I-thou connection and its importance in being human, and I keep coming back to this. These are not new notions. I mean, the whole thing with attachment theory and research goes back into the 1930s. So we've known for a long time how important this is. But what amazes me, and this was also brought out in the book, is that how little or how few of us are educated in the importance of attachment theory. And to me, it's almost like, if you're going to do physics, you need to understand quantum. If we're going to be in the human relationship field, we need to understand attachment. Otherwise, we've got a massive gap in the framework that we're trying to work with. And so I address this not only to, psychologists and therapists and counsellors and psychiatrists, but I'm also talking about the importance for teachers. And they make that point too in the book, that teachers need to be educated in the importance of attachment. So just to give you a bit of a flavour for that, one of the things that I find with most of the boys that I work with is I can so predict their academic performance by the relationship that they have with that teacher in that subject. If they've got a really good teacher, those boys will perform really well. So what's the chicken and egg story here? Well, usually the relationship comes first, then the teacher has influence, and then the student responds, not just in terms of the relationship, the emotional side of it, but cognitively. In other words, they do better academically. Now, as a parent, I want to translate that into this sort of context that my relationship, the ability to provide a secure, attached environment for that child is paramount. Ultimately, if it comes to a choice between how well is my child doing academically and how good is my relationship, I'm always going to default to the relationship. Now, I know from a lot of the teenagers that I work with is what they hear often from adults is interpreted in their mind as criticism. So stuff like, how's your homework going? What are the assignments? And so they don't connect on that level because the capacity to trust that this is actually fine, it's not a criticism of character, is missing. And unfortunately, particularly as men, where we're socialised into doing rather than being, so doing is more important than being, a lot of us as dads focus on the tasks of life in a sense without having necessarily the depth of relationship with my son or daughter that allows them to feel secure and safe and validated in their world. and with that, are their fundamental needs of being loved and